Early morning, Highclere after the wedding, Almina wakes up in a room that belongs to her, and yet does not belong to her. She is now Countess of Carnarvon. But what does that mean when no one calls her that? The wedding is over. The applause too. What remains is a house full of rules that no one speaks aloud, and a marriage that looks perfect on paper, but never became warm. The question at the end of the last video was, why does the very person who stabilizes everything become a burden in the end? To understand that, we must see Almina's life in Highclere, not the glossy version, but the other story. How a woman saves a house that never accepts her as its own, how she functions perfectly, and yet never arrives, and how in the end, precisely what made her indispensable makes her superfluous. George Edward Stanhope Molyneux Herbert, 5th Earl of Carnarvon, is charming. He loves fast cars, he gambles, he travels, and he needs money, which Almina brought. But a marriage is more than a solution, and here lies the problem. George Edward is often away. Egypt, London, political obligations. Almina runs Highclere. She organizes the weekends. She receives the guests. She is perfect at it. But she is not his partner. She is his manager. In large houses, this is not called loneliness. It is called duty fulfilled. And Almina fulfills her duty flawlessly. The first years are routine. Breakfast in the conservatory, inspections with the housekeeper, writing letters, receiving guests, smiling, always smiling. But in the evenings, when the guests are gone, when George Edward sits in his study or is in London, Almina sits alone, in a house with 300 rooms, and none of them feels like hers. But perfection does not mean belonging. 1,900. The Prince of Wales, the future King Edward VII, comes to Highclere. 3 days. For the Carnarvons, this is not a nice weekend. It is the social examination. And Almina knows, if she fails here, people will only talk about her origins. She has rooms prepared as if history would take place there. She thinks about warmth, light, scent, timing, about things no one praises, as long as they are right. The meal costs a fortune. Alfred de Rothschild pays. Every course is served perfectly. Every wine matches. The hunt is successful. The conversations are pleasant. The press later writes, a triumph. And Almina? She has won, socially. But when the guests are gone, there is, again, the other Highclere. The one without music, the one without applause. A house in which she functions, but never truly lives. And then come the children. In 1898, her son is born, Henry George Alfred Marius Victor Francis Herbert, the heir. For Almina, this feels like a seal. Now she has not just brought money, now she has held the continuation in her arms. In 1901, her daughter is born, Evelyn Leonora Almina, 2 children. An heir, a daughter. This should mean security. But in houses like Highclere, motherhood does not automatically mean power. It means you have fulfilled your role, and roles can be replaced. The children grow up, they have governesses, teachers. Almina sees them at certain hours, at tea, at dinner. But they are not her children in the way one imagines. They are Highclere's children, the next generation, and Almina is the woman who brought them into the world. And then the war tears everything open. 1914, the First World War, and Almina does something no one expects. She opens Highclere for the wounded. From September 1914, the castle becomes a hospital. Rooms become wards. The saloon becomes an operating room. Almina nurses herself. She organizes, she pays. Alfred de Rothschild finances everything until his death in 1918. And here something strange happens. Suddenly, Almina is no longer the young woman with the difficult background. Here she is simply the person who does what needs to be done. No guest lists, no etiquette, only work. And Almina is good at it. She knows every patient by name. She knows who needs which treatment. She sits by beds at night. She writes letters to families. She organizes transports. Later, part of the work is transferred to London, Bryanston Square, a facility that is listed as Countess of Carnarvon Nursing Home. She gains recognition, but not power, over her own life. And then comes Egypt. George Edward has a new project. Egypt. He works with Howard Carter. They dig in the Valley of the Kings. And Almina? She finances the excavations, year after year. 1922. November 4th, they find an entrance. November 26th, they open the tomb, Tutankhamun. The world explodes. Newspapers, photographs, legends. The name Carnarvon becomes world famous. But when you look at the pictures, Almina is rarely there. Her money was there, her stability, her patience, but the fame, that belongs to him. And then, in April 1923, George Edward dies in Cairo. An infection, no curse, just bad timing. Almina travels to Egypt. She brings his body back to England. And in this moment, everything changes, because her son now becomes Earl. Henry George Alfred Marius Victor Francis Herbert becomes the 6th Earl of Carnarvon. He is 24 years old. He is married, and his wife, Catherine Wendell, becomes the new countess. Suddenly, Almina is no longer the mistress of Highclere. She is the mother of the Earl. That is a difference, a big one, because in Highclere there is only one countess at a time, and the new countess is not Almina. There is no scene, no argument, only a quiet shift. Decisions that were once Almina's are now made by Catherine. Rooms that Almina furnished are being redesigned. And Almina realizes she has saved Highclere, but Highclere does not belong to her. The servants look past her. The guests turn to Catherine. Almina sits at the table, but she is no longer the hostess. She is a guest. In the house she saved, and then she marries again. December 1923, 8 months after George Edward's death, Almina marries Lieutenant Colonel Ian Onslow Denistune. The press is shocked. So soon? But the truth is more complicated. Almina no longer has a place in Highclere. Her daughter-in-law is now the mistress. Her son is the Earl. And Almina? She is in the way. The remarriage is not a new beginning. It is an escape. Because in houses like Highclere, no one is given dismissal. One only signals politely that it is time to leave. And Almina leaves. She leaves Highclere, the house she saved, the house that was never hers. So, why does the very person who stabilizes everything become a burden in the end? Because Almina was too good. She knew all the debts. She knew how close Highclere stood to the abyss. She had connections that did not belong to the family. Rothschild, the king. She was too powerful, too visible, too reminiscent. And when her son became Earl, she was suddenly no longer the savior. She was the woman who reminded them that the house ever needed to be saved. Large houses do not forgive that. Almina brings Highclere the money it needs. She gives it the shine it displays, and as thanks for that, she is politely removed. Not with a scandal, but with a rule that no one speaks aloud. Those who know too much do not belong here. What happens to Almina afterwards? I will tell that in the next video, because her story does not end in Highclere. It ends in a terraced house in Bristol, without money, without title, without the house she saved.